Good evening, everyone. My name is Scorpio Rogers. I'm the Vice President of both the Bronx and Manhattan campuses of Mercy College. And I'd like to welcome you here today to our third Mercy College Juneteenth Community Celebration. I'd like to start by telling you a little bit about Mercy College, about this special place we're in. Mercy offers more than 100 undergraduate and graduate degree and certification programs, including more than 40 online degree programs, which our provost loves. We have 5 schools, check that. We have 6 schools and 3 campuses, because we're starting a new school on July 1st. So we have a school of business, a school of education, a school of liberal arts, a school of health and natural sciences, a school of social and behavioral sciences, and starting on July 1st, we have a school of nursing. We have 3 campuses. Of course, our main campus is in lovely Dobbs Ferry, New York, about 45 minutes from here. What I like to call the hidden jewel campus is the Bronx campus, which is in the northeast section of the Bronx. And then we'll welcome you here to our Mercy Manhattan campus. This campus, we've been in this building, someone asked me a little earlier, we've been in this building for almost 20 years, but in 2019 we had the ability to move from the 6th and 7th floors, which were a little bit industrial looking. And then we had the opportunity to move to the 3rd and 4th floors, where we renovated it, wall-to-wall renovation. And so you have this beautiful state-of-the-art facility that you're in right now. We also kept the 7th floor and we turned it into dorms. We have 130 bedroom spaces right here. So if you can imagine being 19, 20, 21 and living in the center of the universe and having this as your view, that's what the ability of some of our students. So we have 2 floors, like I said, increasing the campus for over 9,500 square feet, and our new dormitory, which we call Dorm 34. If you'd like, we can give you a tour of this facility and our dorms. And without a doubt, we have what we call awesome, amazing views. Now, yesterday, if you'd come here, you could have seen orange views. But now we have clear views today. So it's in the heart of Manhattan. We have Mercy's International Admissions Office located here, and Mercy's College International, which is a partnership we have with Oxford International Education Group that gives students from all over the world the opportunity to obtain a high quality education, undergraduate and graduate degrees in New York City. Right on this campus now, or in the spring, we had students from about 30 countries. Across Mercy, we have students from over 50 countries. Here on this campus, we specialize in degrees in cybersecurity, computer science, international relations and diplomacy, business, MBA, and much, much more. I hope you get a chance to discuss how Mercy can serve in a pipeline of students whose prospects you are interested in advancing and how we can partner with you for the future. Now back to why we're here today. That was a brief Mercy announcement. So back to why we're here today, to celebrate Juneteenth. I'm so delighted we can gather on this special day to celebrate Juneteenth. You may have noticed we are holding our celebration early, and we've done that every year. And what we hope is that this reception allows you to point us and tell us about celebrations that you're having. A lot of people have celebrations on the day, and then you can't go to all the celebrations. So we have ours a little early, so you have the opportunity to go to ours and go to others, or potentially host your own. So we don't want to conflict with some of our partner celebrations. And so if you have a Juneteenth celebration that you're doing, please let us know. We'll be happy to let everyone in this room know. And please tell all the guests in the room. We have some amazing organizations represented here today and some amazing people. And I will give a shout out to all of the people that we have here. So we have Harlem Haberdashery, just met with Kellis here. Glad to have you here. We have Prep for Prep. Prep for Prep, where we got Prep for Prep right there. We've got our next door neighbor, physically, the next door to us is the Winchendon School, which is high school students, special students, and they do really well, and we love partnering with them. I'm gonna do some more partnership with them, Winchendon School. Sean, the headmaster. We have New York Psychotherapy Center. How you doing? One of our longstanding partners, Virtual Enterprises International, VEI. Where's VEI? Okay, we have VEI here. We have Centric Brands, the Business Council of Westchester. We got Health First, Alice and Olivia. Another partner who has a summer program here with their high school students, the New York City School Construction Authority. And a new partner with ours who's going to do work with us on some of the new projects we have is our Roads to Success. We also have Roads. Come on, let's get Roads to Success. Another partner we started working with, and worked with the last year is the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development. So I'll take this time to say one last thing. We're about to pilot. So I mentioned Roads to Success, and one of the organizations is going to pilot with us. We're about to pilot offering summer, and it's going to be in the fall and spring. It's going to be on Saturdays, but summer classes for high school students. So looking at juniors, and in the fall we'll look at seniors also. So the final information is going to come out either tomorrow or on Monday. So if you have young people in your pipeline that might be interested in taking a college credit, a college class, and get actual college credit, they can transfer to other schools, please come and let me know, and we'd be happy to talk to you and take one or two of your students as part of this program, this pilot, and we're looking to grow it. So we're more than happy to work with you. So we will move on. So right now, it is my absolute 100% absolute pleasure to welcome Mercy's President, Tim Hall. Come on, let's get President Hall. This is President Hall's last community event at Mercy. It was President Hall's vision to extend Mercy's reach beyond its campus walls to connect with the community in which it serves. In carrying out this vision, he has brought people together from all facets of life, all corners of human experience, to share ideas and imagine a new future for Mercy that students, faculty, staff, alumni, and community can be proud of. And before I welcome him up, I'm going to say we also have the Business of We. I didn't forget to mention the Business of We is also here. Another community partner we've done some work with the last couple of years. But it is my pleasure and honor to introduce my boss and my friend, President Tim Hall.
Scorpio. And normally I have a little step back down here so I can look like I'm as tall as he is. So, good evening. It's great to welcome you all to this celebration of Juneteenth. I'm pleased that we're able to gather here in this beautiful place that I never thought I would be working next to, and it's always a thrill just for me to sit in one of these chairs and look out there. I get to recognize a Board of Trustee member of Mercy, is also the chair of our board's Academic and Student Affairs Committee, and that is Jim Jenkins, back there in the back, smiling with the mustache. So, do you all know that Juneteenth is the oldest nationally celebrated commemoration of the end of slavery in the United States? On June 19, 1865, Union soldiers led by Major General Gordon Granger landed at Galveston, Texas, with news to the Texans that the war had ended and that the enslaved were now free. Here's a little trivia. Who knows who in this crowd grew up about 15 miles from Galveston? All right. I knew this was a smart crowd. This was actually 2.5 years after President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, which became official on January the 1st, 1863. And with President Biden's signature last year, Juneteenth was the first holiday to be approved since Martin Luther King Jr. Day, which was established in 1983. So there are commemorative events now going on all over. They range from festivals to memorials. Mercy, I'm about to say something important now. I hate to be standing behind this big thing, because when I grew up, It was the central rule of speakers that you not stand behind something big enough to hide your body. I'm now of an age where I'm prepared to hide my body more than when I was growing up. So, Mercy is on some good ground in terms of institutions who are taking advantage of the freedom that was so hard won and are serving the descendants of those people who gained their freedom in the 1860s. So I have here in my hand a list of institutions who graduate the most black bachelor's degrees each year. I'm not going to go into the public ones because they're long and they've got there are a lot of those, but I'll give you the list of the private institutions in this country who produce the largest number of bachelor's degrees. I've got the top 10. The greatest producer is Howard University, followed by Hampton, and then Clark Atlanta. Those are the top 3. Fourth is tied between 2 institutions named Spelman in Atlanta and Mercy in New York City. Yeah. Behind them come Bethune-Cookman, NYU, St. John's, Tuskegee, and Morehouse. I'm here to tell you that's some good company. And we're proud of that legacy that we're creating in the lives of our students and in the lives of their families and their children and the people whom the trajectory of their lives will bend toward justice. So this is a great thing for Mercy College, and we're so pleased to have a role in that list of institutions who've done historically immense work in the area of bringing higher education to black citizens. According to our fall census of 2020, a quarter of Mercy College students are African American. Altogether, more than 70% of our students are minority students. We are the largest private nonprofit minority serving institution in the state of New York. And what we're trying to do is a simple thing, is we have the same admission requirements for all of our students. Essentially, it's something like an 80 average is required to get into. There's some special programs we have that vary that a little bit, but that's the basic rule. Now, would you think that if you have the same admission requirements, that generally you ought to have the same sort of success among students? I think so. I understand that there are reasons why there are schools that do a better job maybe than other schools, and why there are personal circumstances that sometimes hold students back and prevent them from the potential that they have. But here's the secret, and it's a bad secret. You don't want to tell it to anybody. And that is, in the United States of America today, when you look at populations of students with similar academic credentials, there are huge gaps between the possibility that they will ultimately graduate. Some of these have to do with wealth. Some of them, disturbingly, have to do with race. But people with the same academic credentials. The fall that was my first fall in New York as the president of this great institution, the New York Times published an article and gave a reference to the data, which I went to look up. And the article was titled, "Who Gets to Graduate?" Who gets to graduate? And the article had a single chart that everything else about the article is gone from my mind except the title and this chart. And the chart basically showed people who had similar SAT scores from the lower range to the very highest range. And the difference in SAT scores, where they were grouped together, so there was no difference, as compared to the wealth of the families that the students came from. And you know what the truth is? And this truth is getting worse, not better. In the 9 years I've spent here, things are worse. The truth was, if you had the same SAT scores, let's just assume that's a valid way of understanding academic ability. If you had the same SAT scores, there was a 40% gap between the success, and by success I mean the likelihood of graduation of students from the top quartile of family incomes and students from the very bottom quartile of family incomes. A 40% difference in who ultimately graduated. I'm from the South, so I can say in the South we would say, I'm again that. I'm again it. And at Mercy, we're again that. We're against that notion because, and you know why this is so? Because we know to a certainty that there are things that change those results. And the problem is too few people, including academic people, have taken the trouble to discover those things or have taken the labor to implement the things that change those results. At Mercy College, we're trying to change those results by creating equitable results, which we think is basically, if you have similar academic credentials so far, we expect generally that you'll do pretty similar as you go forward in high school. So let me just give you a little case. The biggest thing that changed things in Mercy happened before I got here, where we put in place a structure called proactive advising, which meant, unlike most universities around the country, which handle advising by assigning it to the faculty, who are pretty busy people, and then assigning a window of time in the fall of 2 or 3 weeks, and the window of time in the spring of 2 or 3 weeks, and then expecting all the advising is going to happen because students, say at Mercy, 9,000, make an appointment to see faculty during that small window of time in this fall and in the small window of time in the spring, that's going to be a successful way to make sure that students learn all that they need to learn, most of which they don't even know that they need to learn, but they do need to know it. We know that. So that's the way it's normally done. Beginning here in 2008, Mercy shifted. It never had faculty deeply involved in advising in recent years, but it had professional advisors in each of the schools. It shifted away from that to creating advisors whose job it was not to wait for somebody to make an appointment with them, not to wait for somebody to come knock at their door and say, Professor Brown, can I talk with you about my schedule? But to go find the students by telephone, by email, by visiting, by, I'll tell you a secret, by showing up outside a student's classroom door and saying, I haven't been able to contact you any other way. I need to talk to you about what's going on and what you need to do. What's happened since we did that? So, in 2007, there was a gap in terms of who stayed from the freshman year to the sophomore year. We call that retention, that who stays after that first year. That gap in 2007 was more than 20% between white students and black or brown students. When we put in place this new way of thinking about advising, the gap immediately narrowed to a 10% gap. It was slashed in half, and it's never gone backward, never gone backwards. And in the intervening years, we've put in place other things that if you pay any attention, if you're the least scholar, you could find the evidence that it doesn't have to be the way that it is virtually all over this country. So that work is not done. I'm tired out. That's why I get to retire. People like Ava and our deans here, they're going to carry on this work. But I think this is the legacy of Juneteenth. It's why we do what we do. It's not to just admit some black students and then see them not make it to graduation. It is to do the things that are necessary to see that the conditions for their success are are present. So I'm going to give you some specific ones. In 2008, our African American students had graduation rates, that is, they graduated in 6 years. They had a graduation rate of 14.4%. Today, in 2022, they have a graduation of 42%. That's a 300% increase. And it's not because we're brilliant. It's not because we're more dedicated to the cause of equity and the cause of justice than other people are. It's simply because we've discovered what works, and we're trying with all our might to do that thing, do those things. So the one-year retention rate for black students from the fall of 2008 to 2009 was 48%. The one-year retention rate for first-year black students from the fall of 2021 to the fall of 22 is 76%, an increase of 60%. Madam Provost, there's more to be done. I know you know this. I know you, the board member Jim Jenkins, there's more to be done. I know you know that. So I charge you as President Emeritus, soon to be, to get it done.
Thank you very much, President Hall. Can we give another round for President Hall, please? Next, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Lana Turner, who wears many hats. A Harlem native, and very nice hats, by the way. A Harlem native, Lana Turner chairs a literary group and produces literary and chamber music salons, is an archivist, preservationist, real estate professional, and writer. Ms. Turner subscribes to the grace and elegance of the artful life. Vintage items account for a large quotient of her interests. She's inspired by a history of black men and women who thought the art of dressing appropriately was a significant dimension to the quality and elevation of their worlds. She is licensed in real estate sales with an interest in architectural and cultural preservation, and is with the firm of Denise Shaw, Esquire and Associates. Prior to real estate, Ms. Turner produced major events. Her work in real estate, event production, interior design, and personal style have been cited in such publications such as the New York Times, Elle, Essence, O, the Oprah Magazine, the New York Daily News, New York Magazine, and the Wall Street Journal. An avid churchgoer, Ms. Turner has been described by late famed American fashion journalist and former editor-in-large of Vogue, Andre Leon Talley, as someone who encapsulated the way many black women are reborn every single Sunday through the rituals of universal codes of dependent, carriage, and dress. Please welcome Lana Turner.
Good afternoon to, or should I say good evening to everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. I did prepare a few things, but some of this is going to be slightly extemporaneous. But thank you very much, Vice President Scorpio Rogers, and to you, President Tim Hall, for I am both pleased and honored to speak in commemoration of Juneteenth, and by the opportunity to attend this special gathering to extend my congratulations to you, Mr. Hall, for the extraordinary care extended to your students and their families, whose worlds became and become brighter by your tenacious efforts. I join the chorus of the many who have commended you, your staff, faculty, and board at Mercy College for excellence in education. Now, as you pass the torch, the well-being of the college is poised for the challenges ahead. Thank you. I must say I enjoyed listening to your remarks because everything to me is about the extension of self. The college could not have the success it has enjoyed without the extension of self. It is that secret, quiet quotient that you have so artfully employed, but for whom all of the people who work at Mercy seem to have gotten religion and understand that too. So I am deeply honored by the invitation. As some of you know, riding along on a bus in Morocco very recently, when I got this notion of, or the request, to come and enjoy this moment to spend with Mercy College. I did not, at the time, know anything about Mercy College. Oh, woe is me and everyone else who doesn't know much about Mercy College. It has been a beautiful eye-opener for me personally to see the level of interest and the level of excellence employed in not just what you have done to graduate students, but to organize a facility as beautiful as this in Midtown Manhattan that could, of course, look very institutional, but is in fact loaded with the notion of what it means to be close to people, artists, like the one that you commissioned to talk about Mercy. I had a small tour of a couple of the labs and the store for which people could come and go. There is a great deal of thought put into a beautiful place like this. So all of you, whether you're partners, staff, or the president, or the vice president, thank you so much for this opportunity. Now to the news of Major General Gordon Granger, who arrived in Galveston on June 19th, 1865, announcing, of course, the end of the Civil War and that slavery had ended. The Emancipation Proclamation set the stage for the 13th Amendment. That was, of course, passed April 2nd, 1864 by the Senate, and then January 31st, 1865 by the House, constitutionally abolishing slavery. It's important to me that organizations and others continue to celebrate days and moments like Juneteenth, because we tend to have what I think of as a 2-second idea about everything, and not enough in-depth understanding about some things. Understanding that if you ask someone walking along the street if they knew anything about or if they even heard of the Emancipation Proclamation, I suspect many might say yes. Ask if it abolished slavery, and they would say, probably. But of course we know, this very enlightened audience, that it was only a first step. It did not abolish slavery. It was a proclamation that did not have the teeth to do that. Rather, it was a strategy on the part of Abraham Lincoln to try and hold the Union together. It is not until 1865 that we could constitutionally understand the abolition of slavery. So, before I heard about Juneteenth, perhaps some 15 or 20 years ago, it was the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation, proclaimed on January 1st, 1865. Though limited in scope, it was nonetheless the cause for major celebrations. That was where the big celebrations were. Frederick Douglass, who spoke at Cooper Union, which is just a little stone's throw from Mercy, proclaimed the document a first step towards healing a nation diseased by the institution of slavery. But what, I ask you, since 1865, after the picnics, sermons, hymns, fireworks, and unimaginable joy, is the relevancy of acknowledging Juneteenth to us here and now, a national holiday? Well, arguing my own question, one answer lies in consciousness. Until recent decades, slavery was generally not discussed at home or even in colleges or institutions of education. The very foundation of our country rests on the horrors of human indignity. It is a shared history, not just for African Americans, but for all Americans, whose imaginations are in a twin state, seared on the 4th of July and the Declaration of Independence. June 19th echoes the call from tyranny to freedom. How do we get here? And what did they do then that allows us this personal moment to think about the deeper, more personal places of a time and a marker as important as Juneteenth for all of us here? It is not just something that is relegated to history's margin or a national day of celebration. I think everything should be deeper than that. And in fact, a life well lived is one that is always in service to someone else. That is exemplified in your tenure. That was illustrated in your talk, President Hall. I would say a little bit about my own family. My mother and father were both born in Georgia, so I didn't know a lot about Texas. They met and married, they met in West Palm Beach, Florida, and came to New York in 1937, where they worked as a chambermaid, a cook, and my father a chauffeur. They tended to work for families whose names are part of American history. The Whitneys, the Rockefellers. They worked for people like that. They enjoyed living in New York in 1937. You will recall in your memories, it was the Depression. But they had a way of, first of all, not having any children, but they had a way of celebrating life in all of its joys by donning those uniforms and putting on things that allowed them to be themselves, and taking, all those black and white photographs that all of you have of your grandparents and those before who were sitting around a table and having celebrations. Well, I saw a lot of those pictures, so I know that my parents had a marvelous time before they had children. And it is that like most parents, they all want their children to do better than they, and gave us as much as they could in their own limited ways. I started thinking about family as a young girl, and always when I would come across any relative, try to write down a little bit of their story. Generally, it referred to dates and places and their sisters and brothers, things that you don't always think about. And I still have these innocuous little pieces of paper. I wrote all those things down some 25, 30, and 40 years ago, maybe even 50 years ago at this point, with these little notes, not recognizing how important all of those dates and those names would become for me. I didn't always have information about what they did to make it, but the little breadcrumbs that I would come across allowed me to think about people who I only knew a little bit, to think a little bit more, because history is important for all of us. And they too came through a time which was not kind to them. I think about my father's mother, who was not particularly, let's say, warm and fuzzy. But the things that I know about her made me think about a place called Georgia. So I know we're talking about Texas, but we're also talking about the South. And we're also talking about where we are now, because in order for all of us to do something that connects to Juneteenth, we need to reach back to the places we all came from. So, in thinking about my grandmother, I think about the first time I drove through Georgia. I was born, like my siblings, here in New York, and this is the world we knew. But the first time I drove through Georgia, I remembered writing down, and I will read this to you. I've driven through early fresh mornings of Georgia and marveled at the peach red sun rising in answer to a new day. I've gathered Georgia's gently curved and rolling hills in my arms and given them as gifts to my memory. I've known its moss-draped trees, pregnant with the weight of whispers and secrets, and tried listening for its language. I've shelled its pecans, eaten its peaches, and wondered about its cotton. What will prosper this land? Where are the creeks? Have you seen a Cherokee? Who are the Africans chained to the sun? The moss-draped trees answer in a sigh with the leaves of the poplar tree. I am its granddaughter, summoned by its mystery, Together and at once, I am the daughter of the Africans, the Creeks, the Cherokees, and the English. But no one knows me, and sometimes I do not know myself. Does moss seem tangled? I think about family in a way that when you only have breadcrumbs, what you do with that to enlarge that picture that you don't always have details for, but that you can imagine when you take yourself out from where you sit and delve a little deeper into the annals of other academics who have had the luxury of time to pull together the information that we do not have. And yet you have that treasure sitting right before you. And so I have pulled that together to think about what it means to do something about Juneteenth, not always specifically or consciously, but unconsciously, that mandate is always there to always be in service to something or someone else. It's always there. So, what have I been able to do with a little bit of this? I ask myself these questions because sometimes it would seem improbable to other people. So in my story, as a young woman of 20, I had a little boy who I love absolutely, who's a big boy now, and I wish he were here, but he's not. In my own story, I ended up doing things that I always thought were just sidebars in my life. I always thought that perhaps I should work for a corporation, and that would be a wonderful thing, or some institution. Well, it didn't happen that way. And for me, my life took all of these twists and turns. I kept thinking, at some point, wouldn't it be nice if you could just report to one place and do one thing? But life did not work out for me that way. And where it took me would be to producing major events, which I had no clue about. I did not have a mentor. I did not work for a group before I decided, and these are things I dreamed up, I decided at one point, because I was on the board for an art school that my son was going to, that I would contribute by producing an event in my house to which people would write a check and be happy. And I did. And they were very happy. And they came, and they almost didn't get to eat very much, but they were still happy. And what did I do? I created an event called Men Who Cook. That event went from my house, my little apartment where I still live, and it went around the country because other people came to New York and saw me doing this thing, and they went back to their respective places, and they tried it out, and they found that it was very successful. So what did I do? I had a couple of friends who always, men boast about the things that they do that you, of course, don't have a clue about. Oh, I do the best steak au poivre. Oh, I do this, I do that. And I'm thinking, I have never eaten a hamburger, ever, from any of these four guys. But they were all very, very boastful about what they did. And so I decided to have them come to my house with these marvelous dishes, and I would invite a number of women who would come and talk about it. And of course, eat these dishes. Well, that notion just got expanded before I knew anything about it. And the next thing I knew, I had about 12 to 15 men, not the four I started out with. And each time someone heard about the event, they would say, "Oh my God, all those men in your house and you didn't invite me?" And I thought to myself, okay, I guess I did something. I wasn't sure about that. And so by the time the event arrived, it was in the dead of winter, of course. Why would I plan anything that, wouldn't make sense? Dead of winter. I live on the top floor of an apartment building in Harlem, where I still am. And I knew by this time that I had to do something fast. I needed to move all the furniture out of my house. I needed a place to check fur coats. Yes, people wore fur coats. I needed to have drinks on the top floor that would still be cold. I hired musicians who performed. My piano always went out after each event, but it worked. I had someone to photograph all this food as it was coming out of the kitchen. And all of those people who stood closest to the kitchen door, they were the ones who ate. So each time it came out, they were the first ones to be able to eat. That event went on to go to the World Financial Center, where by that time I had restaurants and ice carvings and lots of men and the Count Basie Orchestra and the whole thing too. There was a television show, Tim Reed and Daphne Reed. It was, I don't even remember the name of the show. They were another year where I did it out on the pier, Pier 92. And so it was an event that took on, the last place that I produced it was at the Winter Garden. This is how long ago it was. And this was before there was not one retail establishment that had opened at the Winter Garden at that time. And that's how I got to take over the entire space that you now think of with the palm trees and the whole thing. Anyway, it was about filling a need to me about what it meant to get people excited about supporting something. You should support anyone. But if you make it fun, everybody shows up. And so I carried that event on for, I guess, a good, 8 to 10 years. But there were other things. And based on that, I would then get calls to do things like produce political dinners as fundraisers. I did a number of things. I produced public-private partnerships so that when the city, for example, would have the Conference of Black Mayors, I was that arm that produced the events that brought all of that together for conferences like that. But then I would also be asked to do something that ended up being a challenge for me. Everything is a challenge, by the way. Nothing that you ever did before means anything going forward. It may mean something, but not a lot. One day I walked in, and for those of you who can vaguely remember, the Daily News had a big article about Billy Graham, who was leaving New York because he felt that Mandela at Yankee Stadium, remember Mr. Mandela, when he left prison, did a tour of the United States. New York was the first place that he would stop in. And in fact, Mr. Mandela was here in New York to ticker tape parades and the whole thing. Well, Billy Graham, who, not the evangelist, but the rock and roll producer, was to produce Mandela at Yankee Stadium. But because there were so many issues with George Steinbrenner and the stadium not wanting to have Mandela at the time, his argument was that he did not want chairs on the stadium ground, on the grass. Except Bruce Springsteen was coming a few weeks later, and of course there were going to be chairs on the grass. Anyway, point is that Billy Graham leaves New York. I walk into the office, and the first thing I hear is, "Lana, you now have Yankee Stadium." Just like that. And I thought, okay. I had never scaled a stadium before. That's what you do. Yankee Stadium holds 62,000 people. There are only 4 or 5 days to fill the stadium, and not one ticket is sold. Not one. Not that people don't want it, but because of the politics, there are issues. But that had to be one of those events. I produced many things, but that was large. And I remembered when I walked out on the stage, after I'd filled the whole place up, to stand there and look out, and I thought, oh my goodness, I actually did this. It was shocking. There were many things that, I had to do very quickly, mostly not go home. But this is what happens, and that is history in and of itself that meant something to all of us, New Yorkers, whether you were there or not, but around the world. For a man who spent 27 years in prison, I don't know how many of you have been to Robben Island in South Africa. It is pretty desolate, and it is one of the most horrific places one could imagine ever going to or being in. I also, on my own, and these are things that I've done on my own, this is the connection. These are all connections to what we do personally to give something to someone else or to make those connections. I built a community through art and literature. These are all things that an institution might do and do. On my own, I would do this by inviting, at the time, poets and writers and musicians, and even filmmakers who've gone on to make big names for themselves. At the time, they were people just graduating from Yale or from Harvard, and I would habitually host on Friday evenings a salon in my apartment. My apartment's been used for a lot of people, so if you went through there, I wouldn't be surprised. But I would hold these things because it was a way to bring other people into a realm where it allows you to think a little broader, a little simpler, but that you could embrace something that you hadn't thought of before. Because the idea is to take all of what you know and translate it into something that will be something for someone else. So I did a lot of that. Out of that, I also started a literary society. Literary Society is now 41 years old. I have been chairing it for 41 years, and we are still going strong. In fact, it was the group that was in Morocco when I was on the bus when I got the notice for Mercy College. So there was that. I created something more recently and something you can Google later. I was interested out of the Literary Society, having read David Blight's Pulitzer Prize-winning 2019 book on Frederick Douglass called Prophet of Freedom. And it is through his work that I decided last summer to go to where, I was only interested, by the way, I should tell you this, I was only interested in bracketing Frederick Douglass's time in New York City when he escaped slavery. That was my interest. And if you don't know, he came in, which is down near Chambers and West Street, on the wharf after he escapes in 1838, September 3rd, 1838. He lands there, but he got here as a result of Anna Murray Douglass. She was only Anna Murray at the time. She, a free black woman who worked as a domestic in a home, who was able to save her money. She meets up with Frederick. He expresses his horror at having to be a slave. There are a lot of free men in this area who meet regularly. Douglass has this ache for freedom. He decides, and she with him, that they are going to figure out a way for him to escape. She makes a uniform. She sells one of her 2 feather beds. So that gives us some idea of how important an item like a feather bed would have been in 1838. She gives him what money she has, before his train pass. Because it's not just a train, he's got to take boats, ferries, and the train. And he's got to, on some level, still be disguised enough so that he is not discovered. This is not simple. Imagine, I will ask any of you sitting here, and just raise your hand if this applies to you. You just met your person, like Frederick, about 4 months ago. And you have decided that you will give up 80% of all you ever worked for. Please raise your hand. Ah, the skeptics in this audience. Well, Anna had great faith. And in fact, he left. He made it to New York on the 4th. He left Baltimore on the 3rd. He made it to New York on the 4th. He gets here, and I don't know how many of you actively can imagine 1838. This is not New York the way you think New York is. It's a free state, yes it is. But it is crawling with slave catchers. It is crawling with slave holders who own houses and live here. Something we're not thinking about. It is also, Lower Manhattan is the 42nd Street of New York at this time, right? Manhattan. So here he is, he sees someone from the Eastern Shore of Maryland, and he says to him very quickly, do not trust anyone, black or white. Douglas, who thinks that he has just walked into the land of freedom, is now circumscribed to appear for 2 days. He hasn't eaten, he has no money, he has no shelter, and he knows no one. One day he has to trust someone, and he does. Their eyes meet, and he says, oh, let me take you to the home of David Ruggles. And he takes Frederick to David Ruggles' house. So for those of you who are curious enough, you can in fact visit the very site of Ruggles' house. It's not the same building, but the address is still the same address. It was very important for me to go to the place that he stood in and that he sent for Anna. Anna, by the way, never learned to read or write. She was married to Frederick for 44 years. She never learned to read or write. Married to the greatest man of letters of the 19th century. But they had a pact. When she arrived, they got married. And the very day that they married, he picked up the large case that he could carry, and she picked up what she could carry. And they were off and out of New York immediately because it was not safe here. David Ruggles, whose home it was, David Ruggles is 17 years old when he comes to New York. He is a free black man, and he is very full of himself because he is really a major abolitionist, and he is in your face. He wears a top hat, he's described as a dandy, and he is a man about town, and he is about business. He has befriended many people throughout New England as one of those persons who sold papers. So he had these connections to what would have been deep pocket money people. When he comes back into Manhattan, he runs his own printing press. He is a man who most people could not imagine ever went to sleep. He was always about the business of abolition. He was able to harbor 600 fugitives in his home on Lispenard Street. Douglas was only one. And Douglas at the time was not the Frederick Douglass we now know. This Douglas in 1838 was 20 years old. So Ruggles says to Douglas, Frederick, I should say, because his name was not Douglas at the time. He says to Frederick, he says, well, where are you going? He says, well, oh, I'm going to Canada. Ruggles says, no, go to New Bedford, Massachusetts. You have learned to caulk boats. You will get a job there. And that's what they do. Ruggles gives him the money, and they are off, and that's where they go. My interest was in the following. Douglas's time in New York City was from September 4th, 1838, until September 15th, 1838. I wanted to stand down on Lisbonard Street, and I wanted to hear what he heard, and he has written this in his book. I wanted to imagine what it might have felt like for someone like Anna, who through some prearrangement would have to learn how to get to New York with her household goods. There was no guarantee, remember, that he would ever make it. For 44 years, they kept their pact. Yes, Douglas was an intellectual. He would grow leagues away from this woman that he married 44 years ago. But they stuck together in spite of and despite all of the things that could have pulled them apart. So I decided, take a page from history and just use that one notion to understand who was Anna Murray Douglas, who kept no diaries, wrote no letters. The only thing we know about her was what she told her daughter, Rosetta. She told her daughter, I wore a plum-colored silk cloth dress as my wedding gown. When I stood on Lisbonard Street last July, I imagined Anna, and Anna came and got me to do her bidding. I imagined this dress, and I called someone to make it. It was beautiful. On that day, the Saturday before the 15th of September, was the day I would see the dress. And when I walked in, I cried. It was Anna. Because Anna symbolizes to me all of the women, all of those people whose names we do not know, all of those people who stood to celebrate on Juneteenth, whose names you do not know, all of the slaves in this country whose names you do not know. That's who Anna is to me. And so I gave Anna and Frederick a wedding reception on September 15th last year. And that you can read in the New York Times. I'm going to leave it there. Just Google purple wedding dress and you will see it from October. These are the things that you can do on your own. It is only an extension of me, one person. I didn't have money to do it, I just did it. But it's the way I do everything. I realized when under COVID there were things that one could do, I decided to catalog my library. And in doing that, I worked on it 7 days a week. I worked on it every day because I wanted to understand connections. And in the end, I realized what I was doing was an autobiography of myself. They were all the things that I've always done. Written here, written there, dedicated here, dedicated there. Because if you are not in service to someone or something, as Mercy College has stood on this brink, on this Juneteenth celebration, I would suggest that you go home and talk to yourself. Happy Juneteenth.
Lana, thank you so much. Come on, another round of applause, please. Wow, that was amazing. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our program. I'd like to thank the Mercy College Institutional Advancement and Mercy Manhattan teams for organizing this evening's festivities and event. I'd also like to thank Provost Ava Fernandez, co-chairing with me, President Hall, and of course, our amazing speaker, Ms. Turner. So, before I let you go, I'll say that the professor in me is going to give you all a homework assignment. I'll give you several. One, look up and read something about Juneteenth. Listen to the words and follow up on some of the things that Ms. Turner said. And your last homework assignment, before you leave this place, you must eat some food. You must stop and digest it. You must think about it. But we have a lot of food, we have a lot of networking, so please don't leave right away. Eat some food, meet somebody new, think about today. Have a great evening.